so you are John Belham Payne. So, who are you and what do you represent, say, in the wider world of the field of modern paganism?
All right. Well, my rank is I'm a high priest, and I'm head of the. No, I don't like the word head. I'm a trustee of the Doreen Valiente Foundation. I'm founder of the Centre for Pagan Studies.
Okay.
The Centre for Pagan Studies was the first one that came around for me. I was a long-term member of the Pagan Federation, but in 1995, I kind of just got a little bit fed up of all the people that were advertising bogus courses and there's some awful things going on, and I just felt people were being ripped off. And I come from a very traditional. My tradition, my place in the craft is one of a very traditional one. I've been initiated for 41 years, and it took me 4 years to become initiated prior to that. And I'm only 36. But it just seemed to me that in 1995 things were going downhill. The craft was becoming something that was now popular, not commercial in that respect, but people were taking commercial opportunities out of it.
Okay.
There were bogus people running courses, and for me the craft is, there's only one way you can learn about witchcraft, and that is from one person to another. You can't learn about it on the internet. You can't read it in a book. It can only be passed on from one person to another. And there was too much of it going on, so I decided I was going to have to do something about it. We had a large house in Sussex, and we had a barn. So I decided that what we would do, along with a couple of other friends and my wife Julie, was we'd convert the barn into something which we could use, and for other people to use. Come along and have a safe working space. We had a lot of ground so that people could use that without being overlooked, or just a safe space. And at the same time, we could help them develop. Now, I've never, ever, in all the time that we've run the Centre for Pagan Studies, we've never taught witchcraft. We talk about the history of it, we talk about all the fringe things, but we never teach witchcraft. I'm very traditional about how we do that thing. And that became quite successful for a while. Well, still is. I mean, our membership grows daily. We've now got several thousand people that follow us, which is flattering and very nice. But not a couple of years after we'd opened, we had this. I was giving a talk on the history of witchcraft, which is what we normally did, and suddenly found out that there was a lady sitting in the audience called Doreen Valiente. And Doreen was known as the mother of modern witchcraft. I'd read all of her books, was an absolute total fan, and there I am talking about witchcraft to a woman that knew far more than I ever will. I guess it must be like a country vicar talking in front of the Pope, and she was very sweet. She didn't say anything. And at the end of my talk, I avoided her.
Was this the first time you'd met her?
Yeah, absolutely. She came to one of our events, and at the end she came up and she had this wonderful West Country accent, and she said, "Oh, I've been hearing about this Centre for Pagan Studies." She says, "No, I quite like what you do." She says, "I think you're doing all right." So I said, "Oh, how was my talk?" And she said, "I thought it was very good." But, and then there was the buts, and I missed lots of things out which she pointed. And at the end of the evening, as she left, she suddenly came back up to me and she said, would you mind if I had your telephone number? Which of course I said, no, I didn't ask for hers, didn't want to be that presumptuous. And a few days later she phoned and she said, and this is a marvellous lesson, and she said, John, you know this Centre for Pagan Studies, she says, would you mind if I got more involved? That was a bit of a shock, and I said, well, how do you mean more involved? And stupid, I said, what do you think you could do? And I think she was knocked off her feet as well at that, but she said, well, I'm not too good on my pins, she said, but if you sit me down I can wash her up. And it was a big lesson. It doesn't matter how big you are, it's the work that you do,
Yes.
and not who you are. And that for me was a big lesson. So from there, Doreen came along, we got more and more friendly, she became a regular visitor to the house, close family friend of Julie and myself, and she started to teach me magic. Then we started to work rituals together. Then, very sadly, she suddenly announced in sort of spring of 1999 that she wasn't very well. We suddenly discovered that this was cancer, a very progressive cancer, and that she had but a few, she thought months, but it actually turned out to be a few weeks to live. And during that particular period of her life, she suddenly decided that she was going to leave me all of her magical possessions, manuscripts and all the rest of it, which I didn't expect, and I questioned her because I didn't want her to think that I'd asked for anything, because I hadn't. And when I said to her, Doreen, did you think that I'd actually asked you for any of this stuff? And she says, no, and you're probably the only bugger that never did. So she asked me if I would, she knew she was dying, and she asked me if I would conduct her funeral, which sadly I did, but with a great deal of pride. And so there I am now, left with a whole pile of
everything.
Wonderful witchcraft things, which is the most famous collection in the world.
Obviously, I've known Ashley for around 5 years, and probably longer actually. A wonderful friend of mine, I really respect him greatly. And he's taught me a lot, and the way he comes across is very humble. And he talks very proudly about the collection that there is. I mean, could you give a description of some of the items that there is? You said about poetry and artifacts.
Okay. Well, first of all, maybe better if I described it the way that Doreen described it.
Okay, that'd be great.
She'd left me all these belongings, and she even did that in a roundabout way. She actually sent her stepson, for want of a better term, or the son of her partner, to come and see, to give me a copy of the will. And I didn't know anything about wills. The only time I'd ever seen anything to do with a will, my family certainly never left a will. The only experience I'd ever had about wills was in sort of a Dickens film, where he'd sit there with a high collar and everybody would sit around very well dressed, and he'd unscroll this thing and read out that the servants got all the goodies and his wife had been left nothing. So I didn't know much about wills, but the reason that she'd sent it up is that she wanted me to read it before I went to see her, and she was in hospital at this stage, to make sure that it was okay. And when I read that I bequeathed John Belham Payne all my magical possessions, shocked was the first thing, and very unworthy. So when I went to see her the next day, she said, "Is that all right?" And I said, "No, it's not. Did you think that I'd asked you for things?" Which is when she said, "No, and you're the only bugger that didn't." She said that she'd come to that conclusion because and I said, "Why?" And she said, "Well, I know you'll do the right thing." So we left it. She was dying, and I wanted to be with my friend and not bring too many things up about what I was going to. But I couldn't help but sit in her flat and look around at all these 2,000 quite rare books, all these figures that I'd seen in magazines, books, and other people's books, and wonder where they'd all come from. So the one night I sat there with her in bed and me sitting by her side and said, "Well, Doreen, if you have left me all this stuff, I guess you'd better tell me what it is and where it comes from." So the first thing that she did was say, "Well, under my bed, if you'll pull out that suitcase," I'll pull out the suitcase. And she said, "And in there you'll find Gerald Gardeners' original Book of Shadows, and then you'll find..." And the list just went on, and there were things. This was a what they call them, a student flat or a
one bedroom.
one bedroom.
Okay.
A bedroom. That's all it was a bedroom, and a tiny little kitchen, but with 2,000 books in it, and we filled the barn when we got back with artifacts. But I mean, there's so much of, there's Gerald Gardeners' Athame, there's Gerald Gardeners' sword, there is all of the stuff that Gerald Gardner made for Doreen, there is a sword which came from Alistair Crowley, there is all of Doreen's poetry, there is Bob Booker figures, there is the Bellarmine jars. It's just an incredible collection of the whole thing. So she'd given it to me, and unfortunately she died, and I took possession of it and took it home, and then I started to get phone calls from people wanting to buy it, and Doreen didn't give me any restrictions on it. All that she said was, "I know that you'll do the right thing." And I had no idea what doing the right thing was. Not at all. But the more that people tried to buy it from me, or part of it from me, the more that I knew that
it had to stay together.
It had to stay together. So eventually I came up with the idea of it had to be a museum. She'd made restrictions upon where it wasn't to go, so I couldn't put it into another museum. So I knew that what I had to do was put a museum around it. Now, the problem is that if I made it into a private museum, I'm 62 now, and if I'd have made it into a private museum, I would have had to run it, and eventually would have had to have either given it away or sold it. And I didn't want it to become a business. I wanted it to become a museum in the same way as any national museum is. So what I then decided to do was to put together, and I didn't know how I was going to do it, a museum and a trust that owned all of the artifacts, so that they couldn't be sold, and that it was owned by all of us. And that sounds very grand and very straightforward, but it's the most complicated thing that I've ever known. And I've had lots of people come along and trying to help, and they have not had the same mindset as I had as to how it would work, until I met your friend Ashley Mortimer. And Ashley, like myself, comes from the music business. We understand about publishing, we understand about copyrights, and we understand about lots of things. So with the help of Ashley, my wife, and two others, we put together a foundation. So now the Doreen Valiente collection, or the Doreen Valiente Foundation, which is what we've called it, owns all of the artifacts from the Doreen Valiente collection, and they can never be sold, they can never be given away, and they can never be used to raise money or anything. So the exciting news is that after 14 years, we've finally got a museum together. We've now.
It's brilliant.
So,
great news, it really is.
Yeah.
So the idea about that is, you say it wants to be on the line of the national museums. Why? So that they will be available for people to come, see, view, learn, understand, and to be informed of what those artifacts are. And I'm assuming by the collection size, by the way you put it, I guess you guys haven't even managed to scratch 10% of what is actually in there yet.
Well, we have. I mean, it sounds like it's massive. It's not. It's several hundred pieces, but it's not huge. But what it is it's important. You know, again, just going back to the Gerald Gardener thing. Gerald Gardener brought back from the Far East when he lived out there as you know, in his official capacity. Lots of ivory things. So we've got ivory wands and just the most beautifully carved stuff. I mean, of course, these days, ivory is not a politically acceptable thing, and should never have been. But it's there, it exists, and you know, we can't just throw it away. It would be insulting to the memory of Gerald Gardener and also the animal that it came from. So we've got lots and lots of very important pieces. Now, what is going to be exciting is the way that we're going to exhibit it, make people feel involved, and that we not only now have Doreen's collection, but at least 2 other major collections as well. So the museum, when it opens, it should be open by the end of this year.
Could you tell us the location? I don't know. So.
I can't give you the exact location, but we do have a building, and I need to keep it secret. And I need to keep it secret because I'm just so scared of somebody just making trouble for us and telling the local authority that we're a bad bunch of people.
And that can happen from every aspect.
But East Sussex.
Yeah. Okay.
It's East Sussex. Mainly for the fact that most of the collection comes from there, and Doreen's hometown was Brighton. So she loved. Yeah.
That's right. So I saw what happened with the Doreen Valiente plaque.
Wonderful.
Yeah. So can you tell us a bit more about how that came about? Because getting a blue plaque of a public building is very different to how it would normally go about. So how did you guys come up with doing that?
Well, it just struck me that Doreen is also listed. There is a book, or there is a list of people, but it isn't a book. It's called the Oxford Dictionary. The Oxford Dictionary of Biography. And every person that is named in the Oxford Dictionary of Biography, their name stays in there as having significantly contributed to the British way of life, and their name remains in the book for 1,000 years, and Doreen Valiente is in that. And that was brought about not by myself, but by Professor Ronald Hutton. So he's done work as well, also from our trustees. And the whole blue plaque idea was the fact that there are mentions of witches around. There's one significant one where witches have been burned. There's one up with the Pendle witches up in Yorkshire where they've been hanged, and they were all negative plaques that were put up by other people. But they're kind of not official plaques, if you know what I mean. Whereas the Blue Plaque Scheme is a very different organisation. So we went along to Brighton Council and had to talk to them and said, there is this wonderful lady that lived in that council block of flats who died because they have to have been dead at least 10 years. And
what was their reply to that? Did they know? Or?
No, they didn't, but they looked into it. But the first thing that they came back with was no. And so for 4 years we campaigned backwards and forwards and backwards and just saying, well, look, we want to reapply. And they got to the stage at one point where they'd actually drawn the plaque, there was a plan, there was a whole thing, but it still got turned down. At the end of the day, Doreen Valiente was a witch, and the connotations still go with that, the negativity. Anyway, eventually we wore them down, I think, and they said that they would. So the whole thing about the blue plaque was that, there was another thing where they said, John, we've got good news for you, we're going to accept Doreen as a blue plaque. Brilliant. When's it going up? Well, there's quite a list, and she goes at the end of the list. So I said, yeah, but when? And they said, well, we've calculated that. and it won't be less than 20 years, and it may well be, we think, about 22 years before she'll go on the list. And that particular week, I think they were doing Charles Dickens.
Okay.
So there were all significant plaques that were stacked up ahead of Doreen, but 22 years. So I said, well, I'm not even going to be around for the ceremony, So I said, it's a way of bypassing it, try a bit of skullduggery. And they said the only alternative is to pay for it yourself. So we went away and raised the money to have the blue plaque. But I mean, it was great. It was a fantastic day. Hundreds of people came.
Yeah, I've seen the pictures, the videos, and all the stuff.
Just brilliant. The mayor came along. The mayor was new mayor of Brighton. She'd made a fantastic speech. She got very involved. So there we are. Doreen was the first person ever to have a blue plaque, as a witch to have a blue plaque. And the Council block of flats was the first block of flats in the UK that was
It's
council owned.
Yeah,
public
owned.
owned. So that was that one. We did that, and this year we're now doing Gerald Gardeners at his house in Highcliffe.
Brilliant.
Which brings us back to the book that Gerald Gardner wrote, his first book of shadows, because the house that this is going on in Highcliffe was the house that
Where he wrote his book. Okay.
where he wrote the book, and where he walked from this house to Mill House, where he was initiated. And so it's a very significant building. There were other buildings around the country and perhaps in the Isle of Man and stuff like that, but we felt that this was the most significant building. And the people that currently have the building, they love the idea, and they're not witches themselves, but they're very supportive.
They understand its historical significance.
Yeah.
Brilliant. That's really, really good.
No,
to
that's
hear.
great. That's great.
Brilliant. So we're sort of, obviously this is the Pat Crowther weekend show, so Patricia Crowther.
Yeah.
So and obviously, so how did this come about?
Well, the whole Day 4 series should never have happened, really. I'm glad it has done, but what happened was that Doreen, knowing that she was dying, was worried about her funeral. She had been to Alex Saunders' funeral, and that became a bit of a circus, a bit of a media circus, and happened quite close by in Eastbourne, or Hastings. And that was just a dreadful affair with press, and it was just awful. And she was worried that would happen. So what she asked was that I told 6 people only, and I was not to tell anyone else until she died. And then after Doreen died, I could then announce to the world that she passed on. There is a whole other thing that we could talk about, which would take a long time, but how she taught me where the Summerlands are. She taught me where she was going and took me there. And then I took her there after she died. But then, one of the 6 people started to tell people. So all of a sudden there's lots and lots of people that now know. So we had to have plan B. And plan B was that when she did die, that I would lie through my teeth as to where the funeral was, when it was, and in what city it was even, which didn't make me very popular. I did it. I didn't like doing it, didn't like telling their lies, but I did. To a lot of people. And after a couple of days, it just wasn't the right thing to do. So I just told the truth. I just said, unless Doreen's given me a small list of people that she wants at the funeral. It's not against you, but it's a small list. She wants it very quiet, very peaceful. So what I'm going to do is, once the funeral's over, we'll have a day of celebration to celebrate Doreen's life. And 10 years later, it became an embarrassment, because if I didn't do it at the 10th anniversary of her passing, then we would never do it. The 11th anniversary didn't make any sense.
No.
So in 2009, we did a day for Doreen, which we did in London, and we asked. I've been involved with lots of conferences, especially with the Pagan Federation, and we would ask 15 people if they would like to talk, and hopefully getting 3 or 4. We asked 15 people if they'd like to talk about Doreen and their experiences of today for Doreen, and all 15 people said yes, which meant very interesting. It was then titled as the largest gathering of elders ever, but they all very kindly came along and donated their time and talked about Doreen and what have you. So I'd fulfilled the promise that I'd made just before she, while she was dying, by having this day for Doreen. But as soon as people turned up to the event, they said, well, this is really good. Who are you going to do next? So I never meant to have a second one, but so many people put the pressure on, and at that we actually realised ourselves that it was a good idea. It wasn't a conference like everybody else's. There are lots of different. I'm not knocking anybody else's conference, far from it. I love them, but we weren't doing workshops. We weren't doing talks about esoteric things in general. We were talking about the life achievement of one particular person and what they meant to us. So the second one obviously became a day for Gerald, because Doreen's relationship with Gerald Gardener, and that was the second one. The third one was due to be Alex Saunders, for technical reasons that didn't happen. So the third one became, we then started thinking, well, everybody that we're looking at is dead. It would be nice to celebrate someone who actually is still living and contributing.
Contemporary.
Yeah. So the third one became Professor Ronald Hutton, because of the work that he's done on that. And this one I'm really looking forward to, because I think Patricia Crowther is just the most amazing person. I really love her. She's great. Doreen loved her too. I mean, they were great friends. So although Patricia had followed on from Doreen and taken Doreen's role, which she'd given up as High Priestess to Gerald Gardener, Patricia Crowther equally contributed to that line, and remains to this day Gerald Gardener's absolute founder. I mean, she you can say nothing wrong. Gerald Gardener could do nothing wrong in her eyes. So she is 100% total supporter, and she keeps his memory alive. So the day for Patricia, for me, is very important. Patricia Crowther is just a wonderful lady, and I'm really looking forward to celebrating her along with everybody else.
Could you tell us about who are the talkers and what kind of talks they're intending to give, if you know already?
Well, no, actually, because this one has been completely organised by Ashley. I know that Ashley and Patricia have got together, and Patricia has to a very large extent said who she wanted to speak there. So no, I'm looking forward to it. I mean, I've been kept out.
So you're almost getting to attend this as an audience participant.
Yeah, almost. I'm looking forward to doing that. No, today I'll be tomorrow I'll be looking after the artifacts and talking to people.
Okay.
And hopefully doing a bit of fundraising, because the museum is going to take many thousands of pounds to open.
I'm sure it is. I'm to run, maintain it. So
I think once the museum's open, though, I think it'll be okay.
Excellent. That's really good to hear. So going forward, really. So where do you think paganism is today in this country? Because we've got a very different platform of paganism in this country. You said about 1995, you were disillusioned with certain aspects of where I even just hated the word paganism, because it loves that the spirituality comes into that, lots of different aspects around that. So how do you think that is, say, 1995 or even earlier, and then say compared to say today? How is paganism in today's society, modern Britain?
I think what's like with every aspect of life, what happened was the internet. And
do you think Doreen would have loved the internet? Because obviously I know from what I've read from her works is that she literally wrote to everyone. She called people up and she got first-hand accounts of everywhere.
Oh, absolutely. Yeah.
So with the internet, it'd have been like, wow.
John, Doreen, I have to say, was far more modern in her outlook than I am. She was. You know, she was. And I'm not. She asked me once how I felt about gay hand fastings, and I said, well, something I never really thought about. So she said, well, what are you doing Saturday? You know, and she was ready to do gay hand fastings, perfectly normal as far as she could see. Now, me too. I have no problem with that. I just hadn't thought about it, but she had. She always was thinking ahead. One of the, I don't know, you know, this whole internet thing, it's too instant. You know, as I said, it took me 4 years to become initiated, and that was because I hadn't measured up to what this particular covenant expected of me, and until I'd measured up, they wouldn't let me in. So, you know, you ask questions for 1 year and a day, and then they will either extend that, or within that 1 year and a day they'll tell you that you're not right for the craft. Now, I'd never seen, I had seen because it was on the shelf, but through my training I was never involved in a ritual. I never saw the inside of a Book of Shadows, and all that I was allowed to do was turn up once a month and ask questions, and it was the questions that we asked that determined your suitability. So, you know, if I turned up, if this gathering of new people turned up, you were expected to ask a question, and if someone asked a question about, you know, how does herbs fit into witchcraft, then they could answer that to the best of their ability, but without betraying any rules of the craft. So they could say, you know, yes, we do use herbs, and we use herbs for health reasons and for doing this and doing that. But if you suddenly turn around and said, and I've actually been then as an elder in a situation where somebody said, when do I get my first virgin? You know then...
Someone really asked that?
Yes, seriously. And somebody also seriously said, what does baby's blood taste like? But if you look at the two questions, it's about suitability, as to whether they're right for a spiritual path that you're involved with. Now, it may well be that you ask the right questions, but you may not be suitable for that particular coven. Now, my first coven was a traditional Welsh coven, and my second coven was coven because I left and I went to live in the United States, and when I came back, I didn't go back to the West Midlands, which is where I lived. I then moved to the South Coast, and then had to go through another year and a day with another coven, because that was the law. It was always a year and a day at least. And that particular coven were very theatrical. Now that suited me because I was a rock and roll musician and grew up in a theatrical family. So that's absolutely suited me. But you had a situation where you may have somebody that's right for the craft, but wrong for the coven. So the responsibility of the coven leaders was to find the right coven for that particular person. Now the problem is that, and then once you're initiated, that's the first time that I ever saw the inside of a Book of Shadows, and I was allowed to copy it up to second degree, but never allowed to even look at the pages of second degree and above. Now it's all over the internet. It's all over. It's all over the internet.
So do you think that it's like
So it's lost. It's lost a lot of its magic.
So yes, the magic really is in the learning process.
Yeah.
It's taking the time to understand, to learn why is this the case, how is this the case, and then the value of learning that knowledge in the process of it taking a year and a day. I mean that clearly is the intention of it, and now it is freely available to all. Does that make more people instantly a third degree, or do you think that actually negatively affects someone's learning ability?
God, I was involved with a whole Australian thing once. I was due to go to Australia to do some to do some talks. And it was a particularly hot summer where out of the 5 big events that I was supposed to go to, that 3 of them burned down. It was everything got set on fire. Probably nothing to do with me, I hope. But then it was just instant. I mean, there were people saying, well, why do you want to go through all of this? Or why put yourself through that? I call myself anything I like. But the magic is never passed on. The craft is never passed on. It can only be passed on from one person to another. So it doesn't matter how much time you spend on the internet, you're never going to learn the craft.
No.
So you can call yourself what you like.
Only those from, through personal experience can teach someone
Yeah.
secrets, as it were.
Yeah. There's a wonderful expression that the Freemasons have, but I use it all the time. I remember a friend that I met who was a Freemason. We were just talking general about Freemasonry and the crafts and the similarities and things. And he had this wonderful expression that everybody thinks it's a secret society, and he said it's not a secret society. It's a society with secrets.
That's the way I view it too.
And that is that I think that's the way that we should see the craft, because it is. You see, there are lots of natural powers, and with the right teacher, you can learn to tap into them. Now, the easiest one that everybody can understand is static electricity. And there is a way of storing static electricity within your body to use it.
Okay.
And there is a big theory about Bruce Lee that he was actually killed by his masters who came along to see him. They didn't like him working on these movies, and they wanted him to go back to
It was magic craft, it was martial arts craft.
And just before they left, the 2 masters, one of them touched him, and he jumped. And then a few hours later, he died. Had a massive heart attack and died. And one of the theories, which I think has a lot of credence, is the fact that the stored static electricity was passed on through him and gave him a massive shock. Now, if you are taught to do that properly, it's very useful, so everybody can understand the static electricity, but there are lots of others. But you can't put that on the internet. I once went with some other members, we had a phone call to somebody that had been doing astral travel.
Okay.
Bought a book, opened the pages, and I also think for somebody with no inner magical experience, inner magical abilities, that for 90% of the people it doesn't matter, because they're never going to do anything anyway. However much they tried, it's not within them. And I'm not knocking them, just that's the way it is. But then you've got that other small percentage of people where it's natural. And unless you teach that person properly, they're going to get themselves in trouble. So we had a young guy who had bought a book on astral travel, was obviously had a natural ability, had read the book and tried some out-of-body experiences and couldn't get back. So we had a phone call. This I say young guy because I'm getting older, but he was in his early 20s, and he just couldn't get back in his body. He'd been out for several days, and just didn't. He'd read page 1, 2, and 3.
Did step 1, 2, and 3, and then didn't read step 4.
But didn't read step 4 and had to get back. So there was this poor guy that was.
I'm curious that way, because that's what I've done for the last 15 years. Is I've investigated curious and anomalous phenomena. That's what I've done with ASAP and various other organisations. So very curious to that story. How did you bring him back?
By talking about. By explaining pages 4, 5, and 6.
Okay, so and obviously through his
just put it back.
By hearing, obviously there was
put it back. Yeah. He knew where he was, but he just couldn't get back in it. So that there's an example of natural ability, and this is why this is part of the reason why I started in 1995 the Centre for Pagan Studies, because people were teaching people to do, or it was available for people to go there, and the people that were teaching them were exactly the people that shouldn't be teaching anybody, because
They haven't done it themselves.
they were collecting the money and teaching people to do things, but it was those people, the people that with the natural ability that were getting themselves in trouble, and I objected to that greatly. If you dabble in it, you're in trouble. So for me, what's really different? It's what's happened with the internet, and what can we do about it? Well, we can't go back. We can't go back. It's impossible to take it away. It's impossible to take it away.
Because I'm curious, because I guess more people have become aware of witchcraft, like say pagan pride, sort of pagan, and all these different aspects, because they have the instant communication of the internet.
Yeah.
So
the thing is, when I first started, I guess that's quite that's an interesting story. It's how I actually found out that was what I was looking for. I was in a rock and roll band. That's what I did. That was my living. And I was about 16 when it first started. I suddenly felt a stirring in my loins. There was something spiritual that was definitely happening with me. Definitely happening. So I assumed that I'd found God. So I started to go to church. Nothing wrong with Christianity. I think it's a very good religion. But for me, it didn't press the buttons. There was something missing. I couldn't put my hand on what it was, put a finger on it. I just knew it was not right. I used to get to the stage where during the church service, there would always be a part where the priest would stand up and he would say, "Forgive us, Lord, because we're all sinners." And I'd probably tried to sin that week, but there wasn't any of the girls that were going to let me in, so to speak. But so I found that presumption offensive, and for me it became a barrier. So I don't think we're talking 42 years ago, and the Beatles and the Rolling Stones and people had shot off to India, and they were all experiencing the Far East and religions, and I thought, well, that's what I need to do. I'm going to go and experience the Eastern religions. Unfortunately, I didn't have the money to get out to India, but I did live in Birmingham, so all the temples in Smethwick got a visit from me. So I became very interested in Eastern religions, but again, something was wrong. Buddhism almost got me, but there was just something that was missing, and I couldn't put my finger on it. And the one night in the band, we were playing at Keele University, and like always, at the end of the gig, you stay behind and have a drink with the faculty or with the student union bar or wherever it was. And I suddenly heard in my ear there was somebody said, "Oh, go and talk to John. He's the God botherer." So I looked around and what do you mean? And they were talking to, I don't know, he was the head of the religious department, but he suddenly came over and said, "Oh, I understand you're a spiritual person." I said, well, don't make too big a thing of it. And I said, "But I'm not quite sure where my spirituality lies." He said, "Well, tell me about it." So he said, "Well, when do you feel that you're most spiritual?" Well, I said, "Well, it's never in a building. I can appreciate these wonderful buildings, but it's never in a building. In fact, I kind of feel more in touch with things when I'm halfway up a mountain with him, with the wind trying to blow me off, or walking along the beach with my feet in the tide. Just that's it." He said, "So are you?" And I said, "Also the other thing I quite like is being." He said, "Oh, it's scary. I quite like being in the woods at night. I find that really peaceful."
Very much.
And he said, "Oh, right." He said, "So have you never put any of those things together?" And I said, "Well, I don't know what you mean." He said, "Well, obviously yours is more of an earthbound spirituality rather than a higher spirituality." So I said, "Well, I guess it is really." And he said, "You're nothing but an old witch." And I said, "Look, no, I'm being serious." And he said, "So am I." I said, No. I mean, thanks, but thinking that, you know, those wonderful old hags with the green faces and the warts and stuff. Who'd want to become one of those? But and of course thinking they didn't exist. But there was something about the word, and I don't know what it was, but there was something about the word that struck a chord. Maybe it was the fact that I was in quite a heavy rock band, and the word witch might be a bit scary. I don't know, but there was something about the word. So then I went to the library and couldn't find a book.
Was already written at the time, I guess not.
No, there was Malus Manufactum and stuff, but there was very little you could find, very little, especially in the library. But you know, it took me a while before I even found a coven. It wasn't in Wales, and it was actually in Canada, where they lived. But all of a sudden, when I found these people that said, you know, is this and is that and the other, I found my home. And what I found was that the thing that didn't work with Christianity or any of the other Eastern religions was it wasn't of my land. And the one thing that I found about any of the pagan religions is it relates to your land. And that for me was the connecting point, and has been for the last 40 odd years.
So you feel your connections with the earth, your environment. Certainly, I think a lot of people resonate that feeling. I mean, it's very hard not to see the newspaper. It's very hard not to see the news and realise that there's quite a blight going on in our environment.
Oh, yeah.
And that's how people are awakening by going, look at all this, what we're doing.
Yeah.
Greenbelt is now becoming brown belt. Brown belt is now becoming industrial wasteland. Look at the terrible things we're doing. And there's certainly been my connections with things as well. I don't think that's how the progression happens, and that you start noticing that your environment is damaging around you, and you're thinking, well, how can if I can see this, other people can see this.
Yeah.
And if other people are seeing this, I've got a kindred spirit with them. Let's link up, let's do something. And you're now seeing a lot of activism around those subjects, which is really positive.
Yeah.
But I think people are finding their spirituality through their community projects. People are finding each other. And that's quite wonderful to see, actually. You're seeing people who would never speak to each other through the neighbours. They didn't know they were involved in the same groups or even the same political orientations.
Yeah.
People are coming together more and more often again. I think that's been certainly the last 3 years that I've been involved with activism I have. I'm seeing that. And it's quite humbling, actually. Yeah.
No, I agree. I think, you know, going back to, as I think about it, the more I think about what you were saying earlier on, it is, you know, the internet is both a blessing and a crippling disease somehow, because everything is so instant that the community thing goes. You know, the one thing about you know, I mean, people choose to work on their own, that become involved with any pagan path, and that's fine. There's nothing wrong with that. But for me, it was that original sense of identity, that original security of a different family that appealed, and I'm not sure how we can ever get that back.
You say something very important. There's a word that I've seen a lot. It stands out as a word that's very important. That's identity. It appears a lot of people who I follow, friend-wise, who are of the craft or of a spiritual path. That's the one thing they are striving for, is identity in a world of a lot of confusion. And when they find it, they change in a good way. Once they understand who they are, what they are, and the position they can do for other people, and you suddenly realise that you're not the person who's down, being helped up by someone who is not. You actually find you're actually holding everyone's hand, everyone's all together.
You know, the other thing about witchcraft, or any pagan ritual, but especially witchcraft, is if you're prepared to go through all the nonsense, you can make yourself quite famous very quickly. And that's not something I ever sought. I didn't ever want to become. I did want to become famous, but I wanted to become a famous rock and roll drummer, and I desperately wanted that. But I found that with the craft was the most humbling thing. And the one thing that I've learned and continue to learn and continue to do every day is the fact that it's not who you are, but it's the work that you do. And that's something which, you know, which hopefully we're passing on with the foundation. You know, the Doreen Valiente Foundation and the Centre for Pagan Studies is a real open house, because we need volunteers, we need people to get involved and what have you, but there's no hierarchy. We don't do that. One of the biggest lessons I learned about it's the work that you do was, I said the thing a little earlier on about Doreen saying, well, she could, I can wash up, and that was a big lesson. But the last ever talk that Doreen Valiente did was by this time she'd become our patron. When she said, is there anything I can do? Eventually I went back to her and said, well, you could become our patron. You could lend your name to what we're trying to do. If you really believe in what we're doing is okay, then lend your name to it. She said she would. She did. And her last ever talk that she gave was for the Centre for Pagan Studies, and we did it. We called it, because Doreen was 77 at the time, 76 maybe, she was 77 when she died, 76 perhaps. And we called it, because of her age, and we called it, it was an afternoon tea with Doreen Valiente. So we served everybody tea and cakes, and Doreen came along, and she sat down and she gave a talk, and people asked her questions, and she signed some books and things like that, which is great. And everybody thoroughly enjoyed it. She thoroughly enjoyed it, and at one point, of course, when you run these things, you never see any of what goes on, except because you're too busy organising everyone else. At one point, I walked past this the counter where there was a tinkling sound where all the pots and pans and all the cups were and stuff. And when I walked past and suddenly looked in, it was Marion Green. And Marion Green was in there washing up. I said, Marion, what are you doing? And she said, it needed doing, so I'm doing it. Exactly the same thing. It's not the work it's not her as a person that's important, it's the work that she does. And she saw the washing up needed doing, so she did the washing up. And that's exactly what Doreen would do. So I do a lot of washing up.
That's brilliant, really. That really is brilliant. Because I guess it's what you do.
Yeah, it is.
That's how you impress upon other people, just like them noticing you.
Yeah. All I've tried to do over the last few years is keep Doreen's memory alive, and I think we've been very successful in doing that. And make sure that her legacy is permanent. It's there for everybody for all time. It doesn't mean to say that they can wander off with odd pieces and stuff, but no, it's there for everyone. I've given it all away. It's now owned by the nation, and I'm really happy about that. Really happy.
So what's the future then? Is that will it be? Don't want to actually told me once that one of his ambitions really is to see it go on like a tour around, not necessarily the world or just the country, so people can actually have access to see the collections and the kind of things.
Well, the museum's going to be twofold. We're going through the lottery, and the lottery these days is a much tighter organisation than it was. I mean, we've been involved in the temporary exhibitions group temporary museum exhibitions group for a long time. And one of the things now that they say with the lottery is that we rather than approach them for a huge amount, is you've now got to approach them and prove the worth of what you're doing. And the way to do that is to establish public interest. So what we've done is we've put together what will be permanent is a temporary exhibition. So it'll be twofold. Is the place that we've got in East Sussex is going to be the first permanent exhibition, but it'll be probably for 2 years. So it becomes a temporary exhibition. But the building itself becomes our headquarters. So our offices and stuff there, and our storage facilities, our workshops, because quite a lot of Doreen's stuff is brittle, it's broken, it needs repairing. It's ongoing. These 2,000 books were in Doreen's flat, which was quite damp. So I personally have been paying for each book to be restored. Over the last sort of 14 years, I've taken X amount of books to. I mean, I've lived in Spain for the last 14 years, and all the books are out there. So they're in a very good dry environment, but they're all water damaged. Not desperately, but they're all water damaged. So we've got a local guy there that charges us €50 a book to clean them back up and make them good again. So 2,000 books is a lot of €50
Yes,
to get through. So I've been doing that for a very long time. So the way it will work now is the fact that we will permanently. We've got a couple of temporary exhibitions in the pipeline as well. So this exhibition it consists of 22 boards of things, and it forms a tunnel. So we've got our own environment. So we can actually dismantle the exhibition and take it away somewhere else.
Okay.
So that will permanently happen. Not necessarily all 22 boards, because they're 4 feet wide, 8 feet tall, or 1.2, 1.4.
Metric system.
Yeah. But with a roof and lighting and sound and all the rest of it. But that then goes into our storage facility. So every time when there's a temporary exhibition, which for several months or maybe even a year or whatever, that can be brought out and taken and put somewhere else. So we will have the permanent exhibition and also the temporary exhibition.
Okay, makes a lot of sense.
Yeah. Which is exactly the way a normal museum. Also, we will be the only museum of its type that will be fully accredited. So which will work. When I say it's like a national museum, it's the fact that our aim is to, we're going through full accreditation. So the national galleries have to fulfil these things to get their certificates and all that sort of stuff. So we're doing the same, but it's very, very expensive.
I'm sure it is.
Huge amounts.
The collection's worth it.
Yeah, well it is. We've got this thing with Gerald Gardeners, and to put it in a cabinet of its own, which is environmentally looked after, so it's got all kinds of air conditioning and all that sort of stuff. Yeah, you're looking at over 10 grand for one book. It's expensive. But to do it properly, to preserve it for the future generations, we have no choice but to do it that way.
Yes, because you say having protected environments and so on. If you look at books that have been discovered, say more recently, they found more Dead Sea Scrolls very, very recently. Not Dead Sea Scrolls themselves, were kept in pottery jars 2,000 years later, and most of that kind of text, what was in there, like the Enochian text, no one thought they ever existed.
No.
Completely forgotten at the time. They found them and they started burning them, and then they realised what they were. It's like, wow, a whole new book of that time.
Exciting stuff.
It is, and so do you think by that, I guess my joking definition, do you think anything should be tucked away to be found in a future time capsule style?
Well, that would be nice. I'll tell you what, we keep finding stuff. Ashley especially has become quite the historian. I'm not. I think even more since I had these strokes. My brain's not as sharp as it was. But Ashley's becoming, really very academic, and he's done a lot of research into the collection, and we keep finding things. A few months back he was over and cataloguing and going through bits and pieces, and he went, "Hang on a second, I know what that is." I think came back, we found some original Crowley stuff, which I didn't know we got.
All right,
so this is from Crowley, from Rollins of Crowley. So Doreen was interested in everything.
Of course, yeah.
I'll give you one funny story. We the original four of us that set up the Centre for Pagan Studies, and when Doreen died, we put all these books into these cases, and we brought them back to our house from Doreen's flat, and we were just trying to sort them out a little bit as to what goes where. And my colleague Ray suddenly came over and he showed me this book, and he said, what do we think we should do with this? And I said, what is it? He looked down, it was I guess now you'd say it was kind of a little bit paedophilic.
Okay.
In because it was young boys, not very young boys, but sort of teenagers and stuff like that in outdoor scenes and things, sort of on the riverbank or in a boat, but naked and stuff. So I looked at this book horrified and said, let's just put it to one side, and thinking I was going to protect Doreen's memory, what I was going to do was dump it, just burn it, get rid of it, and just get the thing. And we found 3 of them. So, please, this is not pornographic.
No. This
is just young men naked, in natural poses within forests, with sitting in canoes. It's just pictures like that. Then we found a book all on corporal punishment. So now I've got 4 books out of 2,000 that I think ought to be thrown away because of preserving Doreen's memory. Then we found a couple of books. One was Mein Kampf, Hitler's books, and a couple of books by, well, not that we'd throw them away, but David Icke and what have you. So we suddenly realised the fact that Doreen's not only Doreen's library, but her interests were so wide. But we couldn't understand these books about these young boys, and the book on flagellation and all that sort of stuff. 4 o'clock in the morning, I suddenly get this phone call from Ray. Have we thrown the books away? No, not yet, I'll do it tomorrow. And he said, don't, because Doreen's written about them and all the things. She got them for research. And that was a lesson. So everything that we got, we still got. We threw nothing away, because we know that sooner or later, whatever it is in there will turn up on things. The biggest sadness of all of these things, the collection said that I got all of the magical stuff, and what I didn't get was this filing cabinet full of correspondence, and in there she got letters from Gerald Gardeners, from all these handwritten letters that people
have sent. In those days, of course, everything had been handwritten. You was like down the post office, get your stamps, send it off, your correspondence all the time.
Yeah. And I tried to explain to her son-in-law how important they were, because he didn't know anything about what Doreen did really. He just knew that she was a witch and rose. And he said, well, these are not really magical items, I don't think, John. It's kind of personal correspondence. So all of that went to the flame, was thrown away. I'd love that. I mean, just from a historical point of view.
Oh yeah, because I can only assume that there would be progressive conversations with other members of societies or
backwards and forwards.
Absolutely.
She'd write a letter, she'd get a reply back, she'd store it. She'd write another letter. They had it. We could have tied all these letters up eventually. And the other thing that seeing brain suddenly gone. Catch up in a sec. It's very weird when this happens. It suddenly just slips, and I can see it slipping, and then it just sort of goes back. Okay. The other thing that see, it's back. The other thing that we also missed out on is Doreen was writing 2 more books. One was pretty much finished, and she didn't have a computer. She had a word processor, so they were all floppy disks.
Yeah.
Going in and out and stuff. And I tried, I was in an awful position because this wonderful lady had died, and she'd given me all of this stuff to do the right thing with, and I didn't feel that I could make any demands. So the letters, I could only argue so much and just say, well, I think that they're kind of important. Would it be okay if we took them? And he said, no. I've got clear instructions, and this is personal correspondence. That's that. And with the computer, I asked if I could have the discs and stuff, because I knew that there was another book on, because we talked about the book. And the working title was Questions I've Most Been Asked. So it was kind of another ABC. Witchcraft was one of them, and the other one was, which we've got quite a lot of, was kind of an expose on people in the way that she felt the craft was going as well, which will never get published. And we've got a book of short stories which we're also going to bring out, that Doreen wrote. But, so it's gone again. But when I talked about the floppy disks and stuff, he said that he wanted to keep the computer for his granddaughter. And then when he got the computer home, she said, "Oh, Grandad, that's just ridiculous, the whole thing. You don't want that. That's no good to me." So they got thrown on the council tip. So we lost Doreen's lost ever book.
Wow.
And there's no way. I've got no idea what it was. I've got notes as to.
Well, yeah, 'cause I guess that she would have drafted it quite a bit.
Yeah.
For 14 days of word process, and you can go back and rewrite stuff.
Yeah.
All the notes would have been stored on this
That
drive.
was the biggest thing, I think. When you talked about how she would have felt about things, the internet and stuff, I think that she, if she could have had a computer, the modern computer now, I mean, that would have been just a fabulous thing for her.
Yeah, I can bet. I mean, there's so many places I'd love to have been in history, like Library of Alexandria. You know, you have like all these scrolls and things which have been lost to the fires of wars of time.
Yeah.
And it's just like, I mean, Carl Sagan, that was his dream to have walked through there, and because at the Library of Alexandria there was a law in that city, Alexandria, where every ship that passed through must pass on its logs and its legacies and its stories are for historical reasons, and then it was to pass on.
Yeah.
So every ship that ever docked in there always had scribes and stuff on board the ship. So everything, it became this great library of everything. And, for everything prehistory, it was there, gone. And I guess that's much in the same way as the drives and these texts.
But not quite the amount.
Not quite the amount, no.
But one book was precious, instead of all that other stuff. God, terrible. Anything else?
No, I think I'm only thing I'm conscious of the time. Because I'm not sure what time you guys are heading off for.
No, I don't either.
So if you want to catch up with Ashley,
Okay.
thank you very much.
Cheers, Chris.